Hello, hello, everyone. We're going to be diving in just a second. Welcome, welcome. And just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping for those who are joining us live. So if this is the first time that you've joined into a Zoom meeting, you want to make sure that you have anything else that is using bandwidth, anything like Dropbox, Spotify, Netflix, Google Drive, Pandora, any of those other services off. So make sure they're turned off. And if you're like me and you have 42 tabs open on your web browser, close out any of them that you don't need. The reason that's important is that you need a great deal of bandwidth to bring in live video. And if you don't have that bandwidth available, what the software will do is it will cut the picture first, usually, and then you may lose all of it altogether. So if at any point during the presentation or during the workshop, you lose either the sound or the picture, the thing to do is to log off and log back in. The webinar won't go away. You'll be able to get back in if you lose it. You may at some point need to restart your whole computer if you're having trouble getting it to come back up. But that only happens rarely, and it's only if you've got too many things running at the same time. Remember that bandwidth is like a pipeline, and there's only so much of it available at any given time. So you want to make sure you have the maximum amount available in order to have the best viewing experience. So a few other little things about Zoom. So down here at the bottom, if you're on a desktop, it looks blank until you bring your mouse across it. If you run your mouse across it to right about here, you'll see a little icon that has what looks like an idea bubble with some dots in it. That is the chat. So if you don't see the chat roll already, click that and the chat will pop up. If you're joining via a mobile device, it should still be right about that same place, but the chat roll will appear to the side over here if you've got your iOS device turned horizontally. And it'll appear below if you've got it turned vertically. So you may have to scroll down to see the chat, but it's there. I would go ahead and open that up and pop your name into the chat and let us know who is here. I know we've got a bunch of people here with us live. Go ahead and let us know where you're joining from so that we can begin to build that sense of community that comes from seeing people showing up over and over and over again. That's happening a lot already in the membership, but I think the more it happens here live, the greater that sense of community will be. So go ahead and drop your name into the chat roll. That'll also help make sure that it's all working and everybody knows how to make it work. So hey, Leah, good to see you here. And Leah is joining us from Florida. So anybody else who's here live, go ahead and drop it on in there. Hey, Tam, it's good to see you. So great to have everybody here live. If you're joining later and listening to the recording, remember the replay of this, hey, Stephanie, does not disappear. So unlike webinars that I give in general to the viewing public that have a replay that's limited time, this one doesn't go away. So you'll always be able to go back to it in the membership site, and it'll be under resources and trainings. This is one of those trainings. This is the regular monthly webinar training workshop. So we will have it in there so that people can go back through it again at a later time. And because I know not everybody can join at the same time. Let me pull up one thing on my other computer. I have just a little outline that I'm going to send to all of y'all as well on critiques so that we have just some general rules, not rules, that's not the right word. We have the general guidelines to go by in the group, And I think it helps to have questions to ask and things to consider as we go through. So if you're here with us live right now, I would love for you, and you don't have to, obviously you're not going to necessarily share it with the group on the screen, but I'd love for you to open up on your device, whether you're on a computer or on a tablet or your phone, pull up one of your own paintings to look at and grab a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen so that you can go through and critique your own piece at the same time that I'm going through and critiquing mine. So I want this to be interactive, and I want y'all to participate and not just watch. So if you need a second to go grab that piece of paper and pencil or pen, go do that right now, because I'm going to walk you through the steps to do a critique that is going to be constructive and positive without being that sort of empty fluff that's not helpful either. So everybody got something to write with? If you've got something to write with, say yes in the chat roll, and we'll dive right on in. So first off, what critique is not, and I've talked about this a little bit already this week in my Facebook Live over on my page, but what a critique is not, it's not a chance to devolve into negative criticism and deconstructing someone's work in order to tear them apart. It's also not meaningless platitudes. So that deconstruction kind of stuff is when somebody rips and tears you. Now, I've been in the art field a really, really long time, way more than I like to admit sometimes. And in 35 years of 40 years actually, going through undergraduate school and graduate school and then teaching, I've seen people do some really mean critiques. And that actually says more about the person's character who's doing it than it does about the person's work who's being critiqued. Mean is when it tears down the person instead of providing reasonable, constructive criticism. Our brains shut down when that happens. You don't hear anything that's constructive when that happens. That's not a meaningful critique. Nor is it meaningful when somebody just says, oh, it's beautiful, I love it. Because that's not giving you feedback that's helpful to get you to the next step. So I talked about the critique sandwich earlier this week, and I want to mention that again. So the format that you deliver a short critique in, this is when somebody says, can you give me a little bit of feedback on my work? The format is to use the critique sandwich. You start with something that's working well, one or two things that are working well. And remember, you can always find some things that are working well. Then address the challenge. The challenge might be something that needs improvement. It might be something that could be approached in a different way. But every painting, even the most extremely good painting or artwork, has some challenges in it that can be addressed. Then wrap it up again with something that's still working really well. And when you sandwich the challenge between the things that are working, it's easier for us to hear it. And since the whole point is to move forward, to address the challenges, and to become better, then it's really important to be able to hear that in the middle. That goo in the middle is the magic stuff. It's reinforcing to hear what's working, but we really need to hear what the challenges are. It's also important when you're critiquing that you do it from some basis of judgment, critical judgment. So judgment, like critique, has some negative connotations to it, but think of the word evaluation. So when you're critiquing, you want to use a shared language and address points that everyone understands. So when you're doing that, there are like 4 different levels of critique that we can go on. The first is description. So describe what you see. Describe where things are. What is someone already saying about what they're trying to do? Describe the technical qualities of the work. So this is a really easy place to find that first thing that's working well, because what you're doing there is describing what you see in front of you. So you can describe the subject matter and what it's all about. You can describe the technical qualities, and you can describe the elements of art. I think it's really crucial to talk about those elements of art. And that's the painter's language or the artist's language. That's composition and design. Line, shape, color, surface, space, light, motion, things like that, and pattern. Things like that are the very basic fundamental building blocks. And lots of times where a painting or an artwork is having a challenge is right there at those basics. So start with the basics: line, shape, color, surface, light, space, movement, or pattern. Those are the 8 basic elements. Got a list of them for you. And we're going to go through those one by one in just a minute when we critique my painting. Second level of criticism, of critique, is analysis. That's where you begin to interpret things and try to figure out what the person's trying to say. 9 times out of 10, all we need to work on in the group is dealing with that descriptive level and dealing with those fundamentals to begin with. But you might also want to address, what's somebody trying to say? What is it that they're trying to communicate? So the analysis is to describe how it's organized, and then as a complete composition. So how are those elements put together? Then we come to interpretation, which is what they're trying to say. That's that third level. The final level is judgment or evaluation. That's the challenge part. And that's where you say what you think needs to be addressed, or needs to be improved upon, or could be done in a little bit different way. So those 4 things are description, where you just describe what it is; analysis, you talk about how it's put together; interpretation, what they're trying to say, how they're trying to make the viewer feel; and the last one is judgment or evaluation. This is when you're trying to figure it out for yourself. Remember, the delivery is positive, challenge, positive. Everybody with me so far? Hope that's helpful so far. So what we're going to do is I am going to pull up a painting. I guess before I start sharing that screen, I actually need to pull it up in preview. So let me grab that very quickly here. And I am not pulling up any particular painting. I am going to pull up one that has some things in there that I know I would like to change just a little bit, because I think it's more helpful for us to look at one where I feel like there's still a few challenges in there, rather than one that I think is more resolved. Okay, so I have that up and can share that screen now. So this is a fairly recent one. This is called Early Morning Haze. And I painted it about a month and a half, almost 2 months ago, actually. Early in the morning, plein air. So let me make sure everybody can see that. Anybody having trouble seeing the painting? Everybody see that? If you can see it, let me know. Type in yes. So cool. Good. Okay. So in this painting, it was a really beautiful morning. There were a lot of very distant fires going on. So I'm going to describe the setting to you. And then I'm going to tell you what my challenge was. Actually, I'm going to tell you my challenge after we go through it, because I think that's a little bit more helpful. So this was done plein air. It's about a 6x8, if I remember correctly. And when you look at it, you can see that there is a fairly limited palette. The subject matter is a landscape. You can tell that the focal point is, I'm going to grab my annotation marker right here. The focal point is roughly right here. So there's a definite focal point. Remember, what creates the focal point is where the area that has the most emphasis. Emphasis comes from visual weight. And the reason that part ends up being the focal point is that it has the greatest contrast in value and color, that hue, intensity, and temperature. So value patterns are one of the things that lead your eye in the quickest, as well as leading lines. This spot is roughly 1/3 of the way over from the left to the right and 1/3 of the way up. So it's using the rule of thirds as well. So it's got a definite focal point. The color creates a sense of space, moving back. Let's look at line. The line direction, we've got some slightly diagonal lines here. We've got some diagonal lines in the landscape there. Another one right here. All of those help to create the focal point and lead the eye into the composition. Notice we have some more over here. So the lines are being used to lead your eye to the focal point of the composition. Then, let's get rid of all of those. When you look at the shapes, you've got a lot of similar shapes. Remember, things that are similar help move the eye around the composition. So you see these little almost triangular wedge shapes. The landscape tends to have a lot of those. You'll see those repeated throughout the composition because those are the shadow areas, but they also help to lead your eye through the whole picture plane. And you'll even find some of them repeated up here in the clouds. So there's some similar shapes that are helping to move your eye through the picture plane. The trees form similar shapes here in the background, both in the big masses of color and in the texture. Then the shapes of the clouds echo the patterns and shapes that are on the fields below. Our next is surface, because I want to save color until part of the way in there. There's a lot of texture on the painting because I painted from thin to thick and used some real impasto areas of paint in there. And when you think about where the thickest paint is, it's leading your eye towards what? The focal point. And you can see that both in the sky and in the land. Notice in the distance, there's not as much texture. There's more texture up towards the foreground and especially around the focal point area. When we get to color, that's the thing that is used the most in the painting to create the focal point. Contrast in value, but then contrast as well in hue and temperature and intensity. But when you look also at what's pulling the whole thing together and creating a sense of unity, it's to an extent some of the underlying colors that are common to all of the areas of the painting. So the whole painting has an underlying color that's present. There are blues in almost everything in there, and especially in the areas of the sky, but even below in the colors of the landscape, which are created from blues to begin with. So color becomes a unifying element. So do y'all see how I'm talking about the elements of art in reference to what's working so far? So got a definite focal point, it's pulling your eye around the whole picture plane, and there's a lot of unity created from the way the elements are used. Now, challenge in this painting, and we can go to the context here, and you might not know it unless I told you, but as I mentioned earlier, it was a hazy morning. So there was distant smoke because there were controlled burns going on. And I wanted to capture that sense of distant haze. And I don't think this painting does it. I got it in the second one, but not in the first one of the day. So that first painting of the day, and that happens a lot when you're plein air painting, the first one out, it's not necessarily your strongest one. But the first one out, I wanted that haze in the distance. And haze and atmospheres created by lowering the contrast, by having very close values and softer edges. And if you look at that distant line of trees, there's not that closeness of value. It's really reading more as a clear day. Does everybody see that? That right back in here, for example, there's too much contrast there to create what I was trying to do. Might be a pleasing painting, but it's not doing what I intended for it to do to begin with, which was to create that sense of really strong atmosphere. So to make that work, I would need to lighten up these shadow areas. I went too dark, too fast back here in the shadows. All of these areas are too dark for a misty, kind of hazy morning where there's stuff between your eyeball and what you're looking at. One of the characteristics of a hazy morning is you'll be able to see clearly right in front of you and even to the middle ground, like where the focal point is right here. But that distance is going to disappear really rapidly. And I did not nail that at all. I did get it in, let's see if I can get, I did get it in another piece that I did the next day. I should be able to open that one as well. May not be able to with that, darn it. I'll open it in a minute, but I'll show you that in a second. So that my challenge was I was not able to address what I wanted to address. So the challenge that I would want somebody to look at there and hopefully get some help on from people would be what I would need to do to make that look more hazy, and that's to lower the contrast there. Another thing that would make this stronger is if this actually right in here was a little bit darker, so the contrast in this middle ground was even higher. So I'd lower it in the background and raise it in the foreground. So notice in no part of that, if as I was talking about it, did I say this stunk, it was bad, it was wrong. It's talking about things that could be done differently or things that could be improved. I think it's hard to see those things when you're right on top of your own painting. And one of my hopes is that after we walk through this today and you get your cheat sheet to use in the future, that you'll be able to do this for yourself when you can't get immediate feedback from people in the group. Because I think there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to get feedback. Well, we can be some of our own best feedback, but we've got to have a framework to look at it dispassionately. And so going by that guide helps you to step back a little bit and be a little more objective about what you're looking at in your own work. And I think that's crucial for being able to make those kinds of changes. Let's see if I can make it go, get rid of all my little drawing on top of there. Nope, I can't. So that would be what I would do as far as addressing the challenge. Now, if this is somebody else's painting, one of the things I want everybody to try to do is before you start talking about somebody's work and they're asking for a critique, ask them what they're trying to do. Because if you know what they're trying to do or accomplish, you can help them move forward with that challenge. And as we begin to use that feedback loop in the membership, please, when you post a painting into that section, that topic, to get feedback from others in the community, remember to let people know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. so that they can address it very directly instead of going off on a different tangent that's not talking about what you were trying to get done. So the last thing you want to do after you talk about areas of improvement and things that could be done differently is loop back to what's working well. So something else that I could talk about that was working well in here as far as creating that sense of space and beginning to create the depth is moving from the foreground, the very front part in here, to the background. So when you're looking right in here, there's a real sense of three-dimensionality in that field. You get the feeling that you're looking at taller grasses that are standing up, and this is the side of those grasses, the front face of it standing up directly in front of you. And this is the top, and that it goes a little corner here, comes back out. So there's some real three-dimensional quality to that area that's right in front of you that's painted that way. So always finish on something that lets people hook into an area that's already working. So positive, challenge, positive. Focus on the elements and how they're being used. And it's much easier to begin to first identify what that challenge might be if people haven't asked you specifically, and then to move forward and help people go forward from there. So I want to take at least 10 minutes to give y'all a chance to ask any questions that you have or share any thoughts that you have. So Marion or Brenda or Tam or Stephanie or anybody else, Leah, that's joined today, let me know if you have any questions about that framework. Remember, there are 4 areas to look at: description, and the thing that I think is most important to focus on there are the elements, the language of composition. Second thing is analysis. Look at how it's put together. That's where you can find those positive hooks that are really easy to pull in. Interpretation, what does it mean? And then finally, evaluation. So that's where you get to the what's working, but you'd lead up to it by looking through all of those things. So can I expand on how the clouds were done? Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the technique part of it, but I want to make sure we've got any other questions about talking about critique first. So I'm going to come back to that one in just a second. It's a great question, but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for any questions about critique. Any of y'all have any other questions about the critique process? Remember that it's always needs to be constructive. Don't say, I like it, it's beautiful. Those are great things to say, but they don't give people constructive feedback on how to move forward. And Stephanie will tell you, I used to fuss at them when they would use those words in critique in class, that those are not giving you useful information. It's stroking us and making us feel better, but it's not necessarily helping us move forward. So be sure that when you're giving people feedback in the group about their work, that we go beyond saying, I like it or it's beautiful. I think it's okay to say that, but also go further. Give them something that they can hang on to. A really good critique is a joyful process, and it leaves you hungry for more. Okay? So if y'all don't have any other questions, I'm going to dive into how I did the clouds. Marion says, well, where will we find the cheat sheet? I'm so thankful for this, as it sure helps me learn about my own improvement by seeing critiques of others. Also, this helps me get braver. Good. I want y'all to be brave, and I want you to also feel safe about posting your work for critique. I want you to feel comfortable knowing that, and we do this in the free group as well, we monitor critiques real closely. So bullying is not allowed. So people who feed their own ego by ripping others to shreds are not going to stay in the group. I don't think they're in the group now anyway, but we strongly emphasize that positive constructive criticism. So the cheat sheet is going to be posted right there on the event page as a link. I'm going to post it as a separate resource in the resources section. I'm going to post it in like 3 or 4 different places. I'm also going to send it out via email to everybody as well. So you should be able to get it in about 4 or 5 different places, Marion, so that I'm sure that everybody has it. So it should go all over the place. So keep it structured, and at the very beginning, when you're feeling a little shaky about giving critiques, just stick to a couple of the elements that you feel really solid on. Most of us feel pretty solid on line direction and leading lines, maybe even on focal point, maybe on color. You don't have to address all of them in every critique, but try to pick the one that you feel most solid on, and then dive into your analysis of what you see with that. So, okay, clouds. The way that I did those clouds, and the texture is a little bit exaggerated here, and that the photo was taken out on a sunny day. So the clouds have the blue under everything. So I blocked in the blue of the sky, and there are 3 or 4 different blues in there. And then I laid in the cloud on top of that, and none of that is white. It is a warm white made from adding a little tiny ochre to white and a blue, pale light blue, so that you've got warm and cool color contrasts in the clouds. And all of it is done with a palette knife, so that makes it easier to get really strong surface and texture. So when giving a critique, I'll say it, if I do not have enough info from the painter, there are key questions to ask before the critique. Can you recap again the key questions? I think the main question to ask somebody who's asking for a critique is, what were you trying to do? So you can phrase it as, tell me a little bit more about your painting. What were you trying to do? What is it that you were trying to do or say in your painting? So you can approach it on all 4 of those levels, from description to analysis, interpretation, and judgment. You can say, what were you trying to do with the color? What were you trying to do with the focal point? Focal point falls under analysis. What were you trying to make viewers feel when they look at it? That goes to interpretation. What you can even throw it back on the person who's asking for the critique and ask them what they think works the best. So you can do all of those things to start off with. But the key question is, what are you trying to do? Or what were you working on in that painting? So that was a great question. Absolutely a great question. So about the clouds, I see what you're asking about. She says, it's the diagonal I'm seeing that those were the planes to get the forms. Yes, absolutely. So we had a lot of haze down towards the ground, and the clouds were coming in very, very high and at an angle. So the angle was slightly higher to the left and lower to the right because they were coming from the east moving west, which is unusual here, but they were. And so we really were only seeing the bottom of the clouds, not the sides. So if they had been lower and cumulus clouds, then they would have been towering, and we would have seen sides of the cloud as well as the bottom. And in the ones that are the furthest distance, we would have seen the face of the cloud. One side is the face. But because they're really, really, really high, you're seeing just little bits of them. So yes, they are at a strong diagonal. Clouds don't recede in a nice linear fashion back. They come in patterns. And if you watch clouds long enough, you'll begin to recognize the patterns. So one of the ways that I did those clouds was by being a cloud watcher for a really, really long time, kind of like wasting lots of time staring at the sky. So I know what the patterns are. And I know from watching the clouds what the weather is going to be. So, because I'm outside a lot. So when the clouds, for example, come from the east, that usually means that we've got a storm front off the coast out on the ocean, and it's blowing in from the wrong direction. It means that rain is likely to be coming in at some point soon. So that's what that one is. Any other questions? We've got about 5 more minutes before I have to hop off for the next webinar. But let me make sure I get any other questions that y'all have. So would love for y'all to, I'll upload this to the site right after we hop off, but would love for y'all to go through one of your own pieces in there with those questions and see what you can do with it on your own. Remember that when you're trying to evaluate your own paintings, that it's very helpful to have a little space and distance. Don't try to do this when you're frustrated with a painting and you can't figure out what to do next yourself. You need to walk away and give yourself at least 12 hours, like close the door for the afternoon, look at it again in the morning. If you try to evaluate it right in the midst of frustration, it'll only lead to more frustration because you have not distanced yourself enough from it to be objective. She says, in the cheat sheet, can you capture key questions like you gave us? Absolutely. I'll make sure those are in there. And well, maybe I'll also add just a list of the process. Go through it in this order. Would that be helpful to have the list of the process of how to go through it? So we'll make it a 2-pager and have the list first, and then the process that goes through the process, and then the key questions, and then on the second page has the how-to analysis. Okay, we can do that. Absolutely. So absolutely, yes. And again, it will be in as a link. It'll be a PDF as a link on the event page for the webinar. It will sorry about that. My connection dropped for a second. I think my dog may have stepped on my cord there. But thank y'all for joining me, and looking forward to repeating these as we develop our membership training workshops even more. So next month will be a focus on our websites. And so we'll be looking into which kind of training is going to be the most helpful for y'all as we focus on that and on the challenges that all of us are facing on that in the future. So thank you very much for being here with me today. And if you have any other questions about it, you are welcome to send me a short email or send me a message in the membership, and I will be happy to pop in there and check on it. So thanks very much again for being here and being part of the Artwork Living community. Bye-bye for now, and happy painting, everybody. Take care.